But me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to this LouieTeeNetwork exclusive limited series, The Reign of Terror, chronicling the 23 years of pure hell Daniel Snyder has put this franchise and fan base through. We have gone through the first 13 years of his tenure. We're now into year 14, which brings us to chapter 15. And it's 2013. 2012 was a dream almost. You draft this quarterback out of Baylor. He says all the right things. He comes out on the football field. He's making these ridiculous plays. You win 7 straight. You make the playoffs. Everything's going great. The injury at the end of the season kind of puts a damper on what was a fun year, but you couldn't have predicted what was to come in 2013. Even with the uncertainty of Robert Griffin III and his injury and his health, even with the $36 million cap penalty, which was massive, that I don't think enough people talk about. When you talk about the demise of Mike Shanahan in Washington and the kind of abrupt end that his career came to in Washington, yes, there was a lot of drama between the owner, the quarterback, and the staff. But that $36 million cap penalty was a killer. And you suffered that right after the draft, I think in 2012 and into 2013. And it stopped the Washington Redskins from being able to improve upon a 10-6 record and really build that roster the way that they needed to via free agency. The drafts I thought were solid at the time. Obviously, we would later find out that a lot of those drafts that were had under Shanahan weren't very good or productive. But in the moment, a lot of those guys were contributing to the team's success, or the 2012 success. A lot of those guys were from those draft classes. And in 2013, Washington drafted David Amerson. Obviously didn't have a first round pick due to the trade that netted them Robert Griffin III. So you didn't have a first, but you drafted David Amerson in the second round. Jordan Reed was in that draft class in 2013. I don't know if there was anybody else notable in that draft. There may have been one or two more players that I'm not forgetting. I just remember Jordan Reed being the main guy in that particular draft class that stood out for me. Love Jordan Reed. We all did. And I will say 2013 was, from an emotional standpoint, was probably my most emotionally unstable season as a fan. And I say that because I didn't know how to feel in 2013. My emotions were all over the place when it came to this team. I didn't know how to feel about Robert. Is this the injury, or is this just who he is? You know, people kept saying, oh, when you get injured, it takes a long time to come back. And, you know, I'm listening to Troy Aikman and those kind of guys who have dealt with injury, Steve Young, all these quarterbacks who have dealt with injury, had to come back and listen to them talking. It's going to take a little while. So is it the injury, or is this just who he is? You know, we'd later find out this is just who he is. The roster wasn't very good from an offensive line standpoint in particular. He was getting crushed. Some of that was his fault. And this is another thing that I was really perplexed about. Who do I believe? There were so many conflicting reports about this, about that. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's to blame? I was so confused in 2013. And my opinions on players, on the staff, it changed on a weekly basis. My brain was all over the place in 2013. I was searching for answers, and I didn't know who I could turn to and who I could trust to get them. And so 13 was a brutal year as a fan of this team. It just was. So it starts with the back and forth finger pointing over the ending to 2012. With the injury, should he have been on the field? Did Dr. Andrews give him the okay to get back on the field? Did Mike know he was injured? How did he even get back on the field? Mike should have taken him out of the game. All of this foolishness is going on. Then we hear about Robert gathering the staff, Matt LaFleur, who's the quarterback's coach, Kyle Shanahan, the offensive coordinator, Mike Shanahan, the head coach, and pretty much telling them, I'm not running these plays. And having the blessing of the owner to do so. Instead of the owner saying, bro, no. These coaches are empowered to do whatever they feel like is necessary. Whatever they call, that's what you're going to run. If you don't want to run that, then you don't play. No, he takes the side of the quarterback. Typical Daniel Snyder shit. And it made Robert Griffin III feel like he could do and say whatever he wanted to do and say. It would rear its ugly head in 2013 on multiple occasions. And then you get the all-in for week one campaign. And Mike had made it abundantly clear that Robert would not be ready to start week one and that they were going to roll with Kirk. They wanted him to be fully healthy, and Robert was having none of it. And you know, once he made this nationwide campaign about all in for week one, including a documentary that he put out that was aired on ESPN, how is he not going to play in week one? And as the owner, being the chief decision maker who is in the corner of the quarterback, there's no way the staff had any chance of doing what they probably wanted to do, which was sit Robert's ass down for the first few weeks of the season. With Robert in this all in for one campaign, and Robert was a smart kid. He marketed himself. He had commercials out of the wahoo. You got this all in for week one documentary. I mean, he was a master strategist when it came to his branding. I got to give him credit. But it put this team in quite the bind, and the owner being a doofus, or as someone once said, a jock sniffer, catering to his players instead of his coaching staff, it put the staff in a powerless situation, and they had no choice but to play Robert. And so it started this, what I felt like, in my mind as a fan, I can only tell you what I felt like. It started this season of doubt. What am I looking at? Is this remnants of the injury? Is this a lack of adjusting to the league, adjusting to you because everybody saw what you did last year and they're ready for that shit this year? Is this Robert not wanting to run? So now you have to call plays where he stays in the pocket behind an inferior offensive line that you couldn't upgrade because you don't have any money. I mean, what am I actually looking at? Is this regression from Robert? He's totally healthy. He's fine. He's just not better. What am I looking at? So you go to week one, and of course, the Eagles have Chip Kelly, the chipster, in his first ever NFL game. It was very similar to that of when Washington hired Steve Spurrier. You're getting this hot, college coach coming in, all the buzz and rage about, Chip Kelly coming to the NFL and this high, paced offense. So, of course, we're on Monday night against the Eagles. Everybody wants to see Robert Griffin III for his return. Everybody wants to see Chip Kelly in his first NFL game. They just put the two together. And so there it is, Monday Night Football game. And it did not go well for us, to say the least. That's probably a massive understatement. We got our asses handed to us. And the final score may indicate that it was a close game. I think we ended up losing by 6 or 7. Don't let that fool you. I think it was 20-0, 23-0, or 24-0 in that game at one point. We were getting our asses handed to us. I mean, they were killing us. I lied. D'Angelo Hall had a scoop and score. So Vic throws the ball. He thinks it's an incomplete pass because it gets batted down by Ryan Kerrigan, but it's actually a lateral. that Kerrigan bats backwards, and D'Angelo Hall has the presence of mind to pick it up and run it in for a touchdown. Early in that season, our defense probably had more touchdowns than our offense. We were so bad on offense, it felt like. So that was pretty much, I think, our lone score for a minute, in that game. The Eagles were really dominating us. Anyway, Robert finished off that game against the Eagles, well, threw a couple of touchdown passes and brought us back and had a chance with an onside kick to maybe get the football back with a chance to tie it or win it, whatever the deficit was. That didn't come to fruition, and the Eagles beat us in week 1. He was like, okay, it wasn't a terrible start, but he didn't run really in that game. You get to week 2, and we go to Green Bay, and we get our asses whooped. I mean, this is a good, thorough thrashing, as a wise woman used to say. A sound beating is what that was. I thought that the Packers were going to score a gajillion points that day. We couldn't do anything right. They couldn't do anything wrong, and at least it seemed that way. And I looked up, and it was 28-0 before I even blinked. So that game was as good as over, and Robert did not look comfortable in that game. And for the second game in a row, he really wasn't using his legs. So here we go. This pocket passer Robert Griffin III experiment not off to a great start. And I think it was after that game where Robert said, all right, we can just run whatever. We'll do whatever we have to do to try to win. I think he realized, maybe this offense, I'm not ready. Maybe he probably wouldn't have admitted he wasn't ready. He'd probably just say that the offense isn't ready. The rest of the offense isn't ready. We need to do this. So that third game of the season against Detroit, he was back to running. They were back to calling the read option stuff, and he was keeping, and he looked like himself a little bit more in that game. And I actually thought he played well, because after the first 2 games, that Green Bay game had me thinking, oh no, maybe he shouldn't have started the season off playing. Maybe he should sit out. Maybe they made the wrong decision. Maybe it shouldn't have been all in for week 1. So I'm questioning, Robert and the staff, and whether they made the right decision after that Packers game in week 2. After the week 3 game against Detroit, I feel totally different. I think Robert played a lot better. He was running again, so that issue was solved. He didn't look like himself from last year. Clearly, he wasn't 100% on the knee, but he still was faster than 90% of the quarterbacks in the league. Still athletic enough to turn that corner and get to out of bounds. And so, I thought he looked a little bit more like himself. We had a chance in that game against Detroit. Robert had a big fumble where he had a big scramble. He broke a tackle, stiff-armed a guy, got up the field. He looked like this was like a Robert from his rookie season type of play. And then he dives so that he doesn't take a hit. Nobody touches him, and the ball squirts out. Everybody thinks he's down because he gave himself up, but nobody touched him. And so the ball comes out. You're thinking, oh, the ground can't cause a fumble. Yeah, it can when no one touches you. And so the Lions recover, and that was a backbreaker. But even more so than that, Aldrick Robinson had a chance to give us a lead in the fourth quarter on a deep ball from Robert that initially was ruled a touchdown. Replay overturned it upon further review. That ball did not stay in the arms of Aldrick Robinson as he contacted the ground. So they overturned it. We ended up punting. That would have given us a 24-20 lead. Instead, we trailed 20-17, and we never really rebounded from that, honestly speaking. That was an opportunity. I really feel like we would have won that game had he made that catch. But instead, he didn't, and the Lions ultimately won that football game 27-20, I think. And we start 0-3, just like that. Yeah, week 4, we go to Oakland to play the Raiders, but we won that game, and it was crazy because D'Angelo Hall had a pick 6. He had a fumble recovery for a touchdown in week 1. He had a pick 6 in week 3 against the Lions. And then David Amerson had a pick 6 against the Raiders. That turned that game around. We were getting our asses handed to us. We were down 14 to nothing or 14 to 3 against the Raiders, and then Emerson makes that pick six, and it changed the whole game. We end up scoring 20, either 27 or 24 unanswered points in that game. Whatever. What did the final score end up being? How much did we win in that game? Did we win by 10 or 13? 24, 14, 27, 14, something like that. We scored the final 24, 21 points in that game, unanswered. And we beat the Raiders. But Robert really didn't do much in that game, you know? Kind of was a passenger. So I didn't really feel any emotion. But I still felt like, yeah, you know, Robert's fully capable. He's game. We're going to be all right. Come off the bye. You finally get your first win of the season. You come off the bye at 1-3, and you head to Dallas on, I want to say this was a Sunday night, I want to believe. And that didn't go well. That wasn't a good game. But Robert wasn't terrible in that game. He just wasn't good enough. But I thought that was one of those games where I thought his teammates let him down, and they didn't make enough plays to help him in that game. And yeah, he made some mistakes too. There were some mistakes he made, but I thought his teammates didn't play up to their standard in that game in particular. And he continued to take a beating, did Robert Griffin III. Continued to take sacks. Some of these sacks were on him. Some of these sacks were on the protection. But he looked different from the year before. He looked a little bit more shell-shocked. He looked like he was confused. And things weren't as open as they were the year before. And so he did hold on to the ball longer. He looked more indecisive. Last year, when guys were running wide-ass open and he could make quick decisions, the ball was coming out. So you really never got to see his true pocket presence. Even though it felt like his pocket presence was better in his rookie season, it showed dramatically in his second year that pocket presence wasn't really one of his strong suits. And he was taking a beating in the pocket. So we get beat up pretty good by Dallas. Now we're 1-4, and this is feeling eerily similar to last year, except last year we didn't ever have like a collapse. We would lose a game, win a game. We would lose 2 games, then we would win a game. Like, we never allowed it to get to 3 or 4 losses in a row. Until we were, 3-3, and then we lost 3 in a row and got to 3-6. We are already 1-4 on the season, and this thing felt like it was going sideways. There were some moments in that season, and then that one of the biggest ones was that the Bears game. You're sitting there at 1-4. The season feels like it's over, or it's on the verge of being over, and then somewhere, and this felt like it came out of nowhere, we scored 45 points in a shootout with the Bears. And this was a fun game. I really enjoyed this game a bunch. There were so many different things that transpired in that game. I remember being so pissed off at Brandon Merriweather because he picked up like 2 personal foul penalties for leading with his helmet. And the league was on his ass after the Green Bay game where he had knocked Eddie Lacy out of the game, and then he gave himself a concussion like 2 possessions later. So they were all over his ass. He already had a reputation of being a headhunter and spearing with his helmet. So they were all over him in that Bears game. And I didn't think the one in the end zone against Brandon Marshall was necessarily a bad hit, but he already had his rep, so it was killing us. We could not stop Matt Forte. We could not stop Alshon Jeffrey. We could not stop Brandon Marshall. And they did all of this damage to us with Jay Cutler pretty much being out. We knocked him out of the game relatively early. And so Josh McCown is giving us work. It was so frustrating. We gave up a punt return for a touchdown to Devin Hester. I thought they missed a couple of calls on that play. I remember watching the game and like, where's the penalty? And they would always do that to us. I swear I would see holding. They would not call it. Blocking it back, they would not call it. And Hester takes the off down the sideline. He scores a touchdown. And I'm thinking to myself, this is some bullshit. But we were going toe to toe with them, and we were able to outlast them. Able to get some big plays down the stretch. Robert was able to make the plays necessary to lead us to victory. It was a big game for Roy Halou. I think he might have had 3 touchdowns in that game, including the game winner. Robert played well, and overall, it looked like 2012 Robert. And there was this restored hope after that game. You're 2-4, and hey, maybe all isn't lost after all. So my emotions are swaying back and forth again. The following week, I go right back into the dump. You go from scoring 45 to giving up 45 the next week. And this was a weird game against the Broncos because this is Peyton Manning in 2013, if you recall, his first year in Denver, or I think it might have been his second year in Denver. And I want to say this is a record-breaking year for the Broncos when they broke all the records for offensive points, yards, all that stuff. And Peyton threw like 56 or 58 touchdown passes or whatever, and set the NFL record for most touchdown passes in the season. We jumped those boys 21-7. I'll never forget because I told you we were a defensive touchdown machine. Kerrigan had stripped Peyton Manning of the football. That led to a score by the offense. D'Angelo Hall on the very next play, offensively for the Broncos, jumps a Manning offering. The receiver kind of falls down on a slant. D'Angelo Hall picks it off and runs it back for a touchdown. And just like that, we're up 21-7. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the third quarter. With like 10 minutes to go in the third quarter, I'm thinking, oh my God, we're going to go on the road. We're going to beat Denver. This is some 2012 shit. For real. Robert was not playing well. But here we are. 21-7, we're up. And the Broncos proceeded to open up one of the biggest cans of whoop ass I've ever seen, and we absolutely self-destructed for the last 30 minutes of that game. 25 minutes of that game, rather. They scored 38 unanswered points. The floodgates totally opened. Robert was sacked. He turned it over. He was harassed. He was awful. The offensive line was awful. We as a team were awful. The defense fell apart. It was a mess. And you go from the high of scoring 45 of the week prior and feeling really good and like, hey, man, maybe we can turn this thing around to, oh, my God, we suck. And Robert looked awful. I remember Pierre making this crazy one-hand grab. He had to make a crazy one-hand grab because Robert threw the ball so inaccurately. So you're 2-5 now, and the Chargers come to town. And it's alumni weekend, homecoming, call it whatever you want. And Robert was not all that great in that game. He was okay, but this was the Darrell Young game. It reminded me of Mike Sellers against the Lions in 2005 when we destroyed the Lions. And Mike Sellers went off, had like 2 or 3 touchdowns, had that catch where he ran the guy over. That was the Darrell Young game against the Chargers. Like, Darrell Young scored like 3 touchdowns, including the game winner in overtime. We had no business winning that game. Chargers have the football at the 1. I remember we thought they had scored the go-ahead touchdown, but the replay overturned it, showed that he didn't score, he didn't touch the pylon of the ball, but rather he kicked it with his foot. So they had it 1st and goal from the 1, and they had all 3 of their timeouts. So they ran it on 1st down. They didn't get in. I think they ran it again on 2nd down. They might have thrown it. I know they threw it for sure on 3rd down, and they didn't get in. And so they had to settle for a field goal to send it to overtime. And then we got to stop, and then Darrell Young ends up running it in, and we win the game. So I remember that Bears game, I just need to make sure I say this. That Bears game, I left it so excited, not just because it felt like Robert was back and that we scored 45, but that was the coming out party for Jordan Reed. Jordan Reed was unstoppable in that game. And I remember saying, oh shit, we got one. I remember we got us one. You know, after that Bears game, it doesn't take long. You can identify talent very quickly. I said, oh shit, we got us one. And I was right. We did have us one. Unfortunately, you know, injuries would you know, definitely derail the career of Jordan Reed, but we had us one for sure. So you get this dramatic win. We're 3-5, and there's hope. You know, we just had CPR to resuscitate our season, winning 2 out of the last 3 after starting 1-4. So this is a big game on Thursday night. Quick turnaround after this epic win in overtime, and I was excited to beat the Chargers because the last time that we played them, they had gotten the best of us. Or I was still sulking from the 0-5 loss in overtime with the Daniel Tomlinson. So I really, really wanted this one. The 0-9 game and season was all flawed, all bad. You know, I didn't even watch that game. That was the final game of the season. So this one was like the next one for me. I wanted this one, and we got it, and I was excited. So it's a quick turnaround Thursday night, Vikings on the road, and I remember saying after this game, and we lose this game, I remember saying, Robert is back. Okay, here we go. All right? Because that first half of that Vikings game, I don't know if I'd seen Robert, since the injury, play a complete half of football like he did against Minnesota on that Thursday night. He was spectacular. And I think we had scored 24 points in the first half against the Vikings in that game. 24 points in the first half. And I want to say we were up 24-10 maybe going into halftime. And then the Vikings like flipped a switch, shut our shit down. Robert couldn't get anything going. Vikings offensively started to move the football. I think Adrian Peterson started getting going. I think Christian Ponder was their quarterback at the time. He gets injured. I don't even know what quarterback came in to replace him, but we had problems with backup quarterbacks. As Josh McCown blessed us earlier in the season. And it was such a disappointing loss, that Vikings game was. We got down there, we had the ball with a chance, and Robert put us on his back on that last drive, took us down the field. And I thought he had like 2 opportunities to find a receiver for a touchdown, and I thought he blew it, but we couldn't get in the end zone. And we lost. And that was a gut punch, because if we were going to turn the season around, we needed to win that game. And we lost. But I left that game feeling like Robert is back. And that was the most important part. It was like, we need him to be Robert again. We need the 2012 version to come back to us if we want this thing to work. So that was the biggest takeaway of that game. And I think that was like the last really good game that he played, honestly speaking. And I thought I felt like this shift happened. And, you know, again, who's to blame? What's going on? Why isn't this working? Why isn't that working? It's easy to place blame. I didn't know where to finger point, who to believe. I was always Team Robert. until the Eagles game on the road, where we're losing the game. We come back. We get the football. Robert's taking us down the field late with a chance. And it's 3rd and 1. And Robert inexplicably just lofts it up in the end zone. It's 3rd and 1. If you don't have anything, throw it away. You got 4th and 1. You got another crack at it. He threw it up for grabs like it was 4th and 1 and time was expiring or something. And they pick it off in the end zone and the game's over. And after that game, in the press conference, he says nobody gets open, right? Like he's blaming other players. Right? Nobody got open. And, everybody's got a job to do and nobody got open. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, what are you doing? You can't say that. You're the quarterback. Even when it's not your fault, it is your fault. Because when we win, even if you don't have a huge hand in it, you're going to get the credit. So it goes both ways. You got to swallow that, my man. And he wasn't willing to take the blame. He makes this cockamamie decision at the end of the game to throw the shit up for grabs like we playing 500. And it gets picked off and we lose. And he's blaming the receivers because nobody got open. And players took offense to that. I was offended. And it was at that moment my relationship as a fan with Robert started to fracture. And there was a fissure there that was never repaired. And only from that point on, it only got worse. And I felt like it was after that game that the players quit on him. And then you started to hear the stories coming out. And then we got to a point, you get the Sunday night game against the 49ers, we get our asses handed to us. Robert was awful in that game. He got his ass kicked. And now we're starting to hear rumors. And now we're starting to hear these stories coming out before game day every week. And then it came to a head. And we all know the iconic photo. We've all seen it a million times. I've talked about iconic shots from the Snyder era. Sean Taylor diving into the end zone against Philadelphia is one of them. Or you could take the Sean Taylor photo of him on one knee holding his mouthpiece. That's another one. Joe Gibbs coming back is one. Or Joe Gibbs holding the jersey with Sean Taylor when he got drafted. These are kind of, but if you're talking about on the field, Sean Taylor diving into the end zone, Robert Griffin III griffining week 1 against the Saints, and this image here against the Kansas City Chiefs in 2013 as we are getting our asses reamed by the Chiefs 38-10 going into halftime. It was one of the worst games I had ever watched at the time. And look at the stadium. And remember, this is before all of the shit that we now know as a norm in Washington. Like, if we saw the stadium looking like that in a late December game, we wouldn't even blink right now. Because that was the state of the franchise. That's where we are right now. Right? Or at least where we were before Snyder sold the team. That's where we were. That's how we felt. But we hadn't been there yet. Remember, we are one season removed from this thing being jam-packed and us having the utmost confidence that we found our quarterback for the next decade plus. This is the next season. Late in the season against Kansas City. I mean, we get throttled in this game 45-10. Look at the stands. This is at halftime. There's nobody there. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, is this rock bottom? I remember having that conversation with myself. Is this rock bottom? As reports come out every week about Robert or about the coaching staff, about Daniel Snyder and his affiliation with Robert Griffin III, and now it's coaching, coaches against owner and quarterback and this, that, and the third, and all of these different stories are coming out that are just malicious and they're flying around and they're attacks against, we're infighting. And then this shit happens on the field and you're watching and you're going, oh my God, this is a mess. Robert Griffin III is benched for the final 3 games of the season. Kirk Cousins starts the final 3 games. You don't win any of them. You finish the season 3-13. Obviously, it was a tumultuous season. A lot of mudslinging going on, and Mike Shanahan, and he was guilty, just as guilty as Robert Griffin III and Daniel Snyder was. He was just as culpable. He was not innocent in this thing, and he'll tell you that. I was disappointed in them because they were the adults in the building. Daniel Snyder's not an adult. He's a kid trapped in an adult's body. Robert Griffin III is a kid trapped in an adult's body. He had the mind of someone that was 13. So I expected the Shanahans to rise above all of that foolishness and be the adults in the building, and they weren't. They played the game with ownership and with Bruce Allen and all of that foolishness with stuff being leaked to the media. They played that game. Shanahan said, oh, y'all want to do that? Bruce, you want to leak shit to the media? Okay, I got something for your ass. I'm going to leak some shit to the media. And it turned ugly. And we got caught in the crossfire as fans. So you're sitting there at 3-13. We haven't been this bad since, you probably got to go back to, you got to probably go back to the Norv years for a 3-13 season. I mean, we don't do 3-13. We've done 4-12, 5-11. 3-13 is reserved for the truly down dirty Dick Dastardly. Okay, that wasn't us until then. So where do we go from here? I remember just being stuck. Like, we just ran a 2-time Super Bowl winning head coach out of town. Gibbs isn't coming back to save us this time. No respectable head coach in his right mind would take this job. Who the hell are we going to hire after Snyder fired Mike Shanahan? Robert looks like damaged goods. He wasn't hurt. They just benched him at the end of the season, claiming they wanted him to get healthy. It's an organizational decision. Okay, we'll see about that. We don't have a ton of talent. All of the guys that we've relied on over the years, Cooley and Portis and Santana, I think this was the last season of Santana Moss in 13. I don't know if he was back or not. Maybe he was back in 2014 with Jay Gruden. I'm not sure if he was or not. But even if he was, he's on his last legs as the Tana man. Cooley's done. Portis is long gone. And the offensive line it's not in shambles, but it's not a great unit, to say the least. For the first time ever as a fan, for me, I felt like we had hit rock bottom. 2009, I never really got to feel rock bottom because we hired Mike Shanahan. 2007 felt weird, but we just made the playoffs. Even though we didn't have a coach and nobody really wanted the job, we just made the playoffs. So there wasn't this sinking feeling like, oh my God, we're terrible. There was no rabbit to pull out of the hat this time to make us as a fan base feel good. He had done it every time, he being Daniel Snyder. Every time we were ready to get out the pitchforks and the torches because he had just fired a coach or somebody retired because they didn't want to be here anymore. We were always ready to go get the pitchforks and torches, and he pulled something out of his ass. Excuse me. He was the one to blame for the dysfunction in 2000 after a successful 99 season that wouldn't have happened if he would have had it his way, because he would have gotten rid of Brad Johnson or vetoed the trade that landed us Johnson. He didn't give Johnson a contract extension and brought in Jeff George and wanted George to be the quarterback. We know about all the guys he brought in 2000. We were pissed off because that season went sideways, and we were blaming him because he tried to buy a Super Bowl. And what does he do? He went out and got Marty. Couldn't stay mad. Marty comes in, we struggle, but then Marty turns it around, and we're thinking, oh shit, Marty's on to something. And then he's not having fun, so he gets rid of Marty. And before we could be pissed about that, he brings in Spurrier. So you're like, okay, old ball coach. Let's see how this shit goes. Right? So you're excited about the old ball coach. That goes sideways after 2 years. Ball coach steps down like, yeah, I'm done. I'm good. And now you're ready to go after him with aggression. Now you're really pissed. Okay, this is the first time you're really pissed. And he goes and gets Joe Gibbs. How can you be mad now? The Savior is coming back to take us to the promised land. And we get 4 years of Joe, and we're thinking Greg Williams is going to take over. He's the successor. He doesn't give the job to Greg Williams. Then we were pissed when we heard that he was thinking about giving it to Jim Fossil. And so he switches gears, and he pivots, and he gives it to Jim Zorn. And doesn't seem like a bad idea after the first 8 weeks of the season, and you're 6-2. But that season quickly fell the hell apart. And we saw what that happened with that. The next year, it was an embarrassment and a mess. And you're thinking, okay, hey, get the torches. I'll get the pitchfork. I got the lighter. We're going to light this baby up, and we're going to go, and we are going to set this place ablaze. And then he goes and gets a 2-time Super Bowl winning head coach in Mike Shanahan. All right, you blow out the torch. You put the pitchfork down, and you say, all right, Birdman hand rub. Let's see how fast it'll take Mike to turn this shit around. And then 2012 happens, and you're feeling like, here we go. And then 2013 happens, and a lot of it is due to Robert and his ego, Bruce Allen and his shenanigans, Dan Snyder and his immaturity, and his inability to set boundaries, and then Mike and Kyle and company simply not being the best at dealing with all of the shit that was going on and not handling it in a way that you would expect a 2-time Super Bowl winning head coach to handle it. We were constantly lied to by Mike, which I didn't care about. But we were constantly lied to, which led you not to believe him even when he might have been telling the truth. Then you had the leaks. We know it came from Mike and company. But they were only doing that because they were going tit for tat because of the leaks coming from Bruce Allen and Snyder and company. And so really disappointed in them, not putting their foot down. They didn't have the backing of ownership, so they felt like they had to do certain things. And all of a sudden, they're not here anymore. And you're like, who in the hell are we going to hire? Who in the hell wants this job? Somebody's going to take it. It's only 32 of these things. So it's not like you're not going to be able to find somebody to take it. It's just not going to be someone that moves the needle. And at this desperate stage that we're at, in the state that we were in at that time, the only thing that truly mattered was fixing Robert Griffin III. And that's why the next hire made a lot of sense in the moment, and we wanted to see where it was going to go. And that's where we end 2013. And when I tell you, I was as confused as ever, and that was the first time I had seen rock bottom. 2009 felt like rock bottom, but during that season, I laughed to stop from crying in 2009. But before I could, laughing turned to pure anger and wanting to lash out at somebody and wanting heads to roll, Mike Shanahan. We already knew Jim Zorn was getting fired. He was dead man walking a long time ago. Before you could even get mad, Mike Shanahan was coming to town. You had a real adult in the building again. This time, there was no real adult coming to save us. And you were questioning whether Robert would ever be the same. So that's where we end this journey. Chapter 15. Yeah. So now we start a new era in Washington Redskins football. And it got off to a really interesting start. That's where we'll end, and I'll see you guys next time on the next installment of The Reign of Terror. Thank you guys for joining me. I look forward to chopping it up with you as we continue to chronicle the 23 years of pure hell that Daniel Snyder has put this fan base through. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.
LouieTeeNetwork.